For 15 years, Arlo believed the official story. His mother, Ilara, got lost in the great blizzard of '87 and succumbed to the elements. The grief shaped him, a constant, cold companion through his youth. But when a melting glacier reveals a set of footprints preserved in ice, footprints leading not to a final resting place, but to the dark mouth of a forgotten mining cave, Arlo realizes the story of a tragic accident may have been a carefully constructed lie. What he would uncover in that frozen darkness wouldn't just rewrite his past, but would also force him to confront the man he called his father. Stay with us as we piece together this chilling mystery. The silence of his small apartment was a familiar weight. At 23, Arlo had become a connoisseur of quiet rooms and solitary meals. It was a life built in the shadow of a memory, the ghost of a snowstorm that had swallowed his mother whole when he was just 8 years old. He could still feel the phantom chill of that day, the rattling of the window panes in their small mountain home in Colorado, the frantic energy of the adults. His mother, Ilara, had gone out for a quick drive to town for supplies before the storm hit its peak. She never came back. The search parties lasted for weeks, but the blizzard of '87 was relentless. It buried cars, roads, and hope under 10 feet of snow. Eventually, the search was called off, and Ilara was declared a victim of the storm. His father, Corbin, had handled it with a stoic grief that Arlo, even as a child, found unsettling. There were no tears, just a grim acceptance, a closing of a chapter. Corbin sold the house within a year, moving them to a flat, predictable suburb hours away from the mountains that had claimed his wife. He never spoke of her. Any mention of Ilara's name was met with a stony silence that taught Arlo to bury his own grief, to pack it away like the few photos of his mother he kept in a shoebox under his bed. Over the years, his relationship with his father had settled into a kind of polite, distant truce. They spoke on holidays, exchanged emotionless pleasantries, two strangers bound by a tragedy they never discussed. Arlo grew up feeling like a puzzle with a missing piece, the space his mother left behind, a hollow ache that never quite faded. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning. It was the sheriff's department from Park County, their old home. The sheriff, a man named Peterson who sounded weary from a long career, got straight to the point. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Sheriff Peterson. We're calling about your mother, Ilara Thorne." Arlo's grip tightened on the phone. "Yes?" "Well, something's come up. We've had an unusually warm summer up here. The perennial glacier, up on Mount Sheridan, has receded more than anyone's ever seen. A couple of hikers were off trail yesterday in that newly exposed area and, well, they found something." Arlo's heart began to pound. "Her body?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "No, not exactly," the sheriff said, a note of wonder in his voice. "Footprints. A whole line of them, perfectly preserved in a layer of ice that's been solid for 15 years. They lead from the old access road right to the mouth of the abandoned Starfall silver mine." Arlo felt a wave of dizziness. Footprints. After all this time. "Are you sure they're hers?" The boot tread matches the brand she was known to wear, and the prints are heading away from the road, deeper into the wilderness, right where her car was found. "We have to assume they're hers. The thing is, Arlo, the mine entrance was sealed by ice and snow that same winter. No one's been in there since. If she went in, she never came out." A new kind of grief, sharp and immediate, pierced through the dull ache Arlo had carried for years. She hadn't just been lost in the whiteout. She had found a shelter, a last desperate hope, and had been entombed there. He had to go. He had to be the one to bring her home. He thanked the sheriff, his mind already racing. His first call was to his father. Corbin picked up on the fourth ring. Arlo explained what the sheriff had told him, the words tumbling out in a rush of renewed sorrow and strange excitement. He expected his father to share in the shock, to feel the same pull to finally find closure. Instead, the line was silent for a long moment. "Leave it alone, Arlo," Corbin finally said, his voice flat and cold. "What?" "Dad, they think they found where she is. I'm going up there." "For what?" Corbin's voice was sharp. "To see a skeleton in a cave? Let the authorities handle it. It was a long time ago. Dredging it all up again won't do anyone any good. Let her rest in peace. The coldness of his father's response was a shock. It wasn't just detached, it was resistant, almost angry. A strange, unsettling feeling prickled at the back of Arlo's neck. Why would his father not want this? Why would he not want to finally know? I have to go, Dad, Arlo said, his resolve hardening. I'll call you when I know more. He hung up before Corbin could argue further, the conversation leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. His father's reaction didn't make sense, and for the first time in 15 years, a tiny crack appeared in the solid wall of the official story. The drive back to Park County was like traveling back in time. The familiar peaks of the Rockies grew larger in his windshield, jagged and imposing. They were no longer just a beautiful landscape. They were a crime scene, a tomb. He met Sheriff Peterson at the small, wood-paneled station. The sheriff was older now, his face a road map of long winters and difficult cases, but his eyes were kind. He offered his condolences before spreading a large topographical map across his desk. This is where they were found, he said, tapping a red circle high on the slopes of Mount Sheridan. The Starfall Mine. It's been defunct since the 50s. The entrance is on a steep grade, not easy to get to, especially in a blizzard. He led Arlo to an evidence room where a plaster cast of one of the footprints sat on a table. It was a woman's hiking boot, small and determined. It was real. A young, capable park ranger named Lena was assigned to escort him. She had a quiet confidence that Arlo found reassuring. They took a four-wheel drive truck as far up the mountain as the rough service road would allow, then began the rest of the journey on foot. The air grew thin and cold. The landscape was a raw, stunning mix of rock, hardy pines, and vast fields of snow. After an hour of hiking, Lena stopped. There, she said, pointing ahead. The scene was surreal. A wide scar of gray rock and dirt cut across the snowfield, the area where the glacier had retreated. And there, leading from the edge of the snow into the rock field, was the trail. It wasn't a vague impression, it was a series of perfectly clear footprints, each one a frozen snapshot of his mother's last moments. They were delicate, almost ghostly, under the harsh sun. Arlo felt the air leave his lungs. He followed them with his eyes, tracing their path across the rocky ground to a dark, gaping hole in the mountainside, the entrance to the Starfall Mine. It was a jagged mouth of rock, draped with icicles that glittered like teeth. The footprints didn't hesitate. They marched straight toward it and disappeared into the blackness. We've secured the entrance but haven't gone deep inside, Lena said softly. We wanted to wait for family. Arlo nodded, unable to speak. He was standing at the edge of his mother's grave. He approached the entrance, his own boots crunching on the loose rock. The air flowing out of the mine was frigid, carrying the scent of damp earth and deep, unending cold. He was terrified of what he would find, but the need to know was stronger than any fear. Lena handed him a powerful flashlight. Ready? She asked. Arlo took a deep breath, clicked on the beam, and stepped across the threshold, leaving the bright, living world behind and following his mother's ghost into the earth. The beam from his flashlight cut a nervous path through the absolute darkness. The mine tunnel was narrow, the walls rough-hewn rock that sparkled with flecks of quartz. The ground was uneven, littered with loose stones. Lena followed a few feet behind him, her presence a small comfort in the crushing silence. Every shadow seemed to hold the shape he dreaded, the final, still form of his mother. But as they ventured deeper, there was nothing. No sign of a body, no discarded clothing, nothing but the empty, echoing tunnel. The sheriff said the entrance was sealed by ice, Arlo said, his voice sounding small in the vast quiet. If she came in here, she couldn't have gotten out. That's right, Lena agreed. She has to be in here somewhere. They walked for what felt like an eternity, the tunnel twisting and dipping. Then Arlo's light caught something out of place. Tucked into a small alcove, almost completely hidden by a jutting slab of rock, was a bag. It was a waterproof canvas pack, a faded green color, covered in a thin layer of dust. His breath caught in his throat. He recognized it from the few photos he had. It was his mother's. With trembling hands, he reached for it. It was surprisingly light. He knelt on the cold ground and unfastened the stiff buckles. Inside, the contents were sparse and practical. A small, high-powered flashlight, its batteries long dead. A half-eaten bar of nuts and dried fruit, the wrapper brittle with age. A compass, and underneath it all, a small, leather-bound journal, its cover warped from the damp cold. Arlo's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was her final message, her goodbye. With Lena watching silently, he opened the journal. The first page was dated the day she disappeared. He expected to read about the storm, about being lost and afraid, but the words he saw made the blood drain from his face. The storm is my only chance. If this works, Arlo will be safe. Corbin will never find us. He read the sentence again, and then again. Corbin will never find us. She wasn't writing about the weather. She was writing about his father. He frantically flipped through the pages, his hands shaking so badly he could barely focus on the elegant, looping script. The journal wasn't the story of a tragic accident. It was the detailed, terrifying account of her escape. For months, Alara had been planning to leave her husband. The journal was filled with entries describing Corbin's escalating anger, his controlling nature, the accidents that left her with bruises she had to hide with long sleeves and makeup. She wrote about his unpredictable temper, a quiet, simmering rage that could explode without warning. She wasn't afraid for herself, she wrote, but for Arlo. She was terrified of the man her son would become if he grew up watching his father's casual cruelty. She had secretly saved money, studied old maps, and planned her escape route. The Starfall mine was not a random shelter. It was a calculated destination. She had discovered from an old surveyor's map that the mine wasn't a dead end. A secondary ventilation shaft, long forgotten, connected the main tunnel to another valley, 5 miles away on the other side of the mountain. A college friend was waiting for her there, ready to drive her and Arlo to a new life under a new name. Her plan was to take Arlo with her, but Corbin had grown suspicious in the final weeks. He had started watching her, monitoring her calls. She knew if she took Arlo, Corbin would hunt them down relentlessly. So she made a heartbreaking choice. She would leave first, establish a safe life, and then find a way to come back for her son. The blizzard wasn't her enemy. It was her accomplice, the perfect cover for her disappearance. She had deliberately parked her car on the access road and left the footprints leading into the mine. She wanted everyone, especially Corbin, to believe she had perished on the mountain. It was the only way she could truly be free. Arlo felt a profound, gut-wrenching shift in his understanding of the world. His mother hadn't abandoned him. She hadn't died a victim. She had been a soldier, a survivor, executing a desperate, brilliant plan to save them both. As he read on, a single entry made his blood run cold. I saw his truck, I swear I did, just for a second through the snow, down on the highway. He's looking for me. He knows. God, please don't let him find me. Please let me make it through the tunnels. Arlo's mind flashed back to that day. He remembered his father coming home late, covered in snow, his face grim. He had told the neighbors he'd been out helping the search party, but there was no official search party yet. The storm was still raging. His father hadn't been searching. He had been hunting. The drive home from the mountains was a silent, 4-hour blur. The journal sat on the passenger seat, a tangible piece of a past he never knew existed. The woman in its pages was a stranger, fierce, terrified, and braver than anyone he had ever known. And the man who had raised him, the quiet, stoic father, was a monster. The polite distance he'd maintained with Corbin all these years now felt like a cowardly lie. He had been living in the house of his mother's tormentor. He didn't call ahead. He walked into his father's suburban home using the key he still carried. Corbin was in his usual armchair, reading the newspaper, a glass of iced tea sweating on the end table beside him. He looked up, his face showing mild surprise. At 65, he was softer, paunchier, his hair thinned to a few gray wisps. He looked like any other harmless retiree. Arlo, you're back. Did you find what you were looking for? He asked, his voice even. Arlo didn't answer. He walked to the center of the room and placed the small, weathered journal on the coffee table between them. The sound it made was soft, but it landed with the force of a grenade. Corbin's eyes flickered down to the book, and for a split second, Arlo saw a flash of something in his face, not surprise, but a cold, dark recognition. The mask of the grieving widower slipped. "I know what you did," Arlo said, his voice low and shaking with a fury that had been building for 15 years. Corbin's composure returned instantly. He folded his newspaper neatly and set it aside. "I don't know what you're talking about. That's just some old diary. Your mother was unstable toward the end. The grief over her own mother's passing, it affected her." "She wasn't unstable. She was terrified," Arlo shot back, his voice rising. He picked up the journal. "She wrote it all down, Dad. The bruises, the threats, the way you watched her every move. She wasn't lost in a storm. She was running for her life. From you." He opened the journal and began to read his mother's words aloud. He read about the night Corbin threw a plate at the wall just inches from her head, about the time he locked her in the pantry for an hour because dinner was late. He read her fears for him, her little boy, asleep in the next room, and her desperate, heartbreaking plan to save him. With every word, Corbin's face grew paler, his frail, elderly facade crumbling to reveal the cold, hard man beneath. "Lies," Corbin spat, but his voice lacked conviction. She was always dramatic. "Then tell me this," Arlo said, his eyes locking on his father's. "Where were you on the day she disappeared? You told everyone you were out helping search for her, but the storm was still at its peak. There was no search party. You were looking for her, weren't you? She saw your truck on the highway. She wrote it right here. You went after her." That was the final blow. Corbin seemed to deflate in his chair, the last of his energy draining away. The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of decades of deceit. Finally he spoke, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. "She was going to take you from me. My son. She had no right." It was a confession. He admitted everything. He had suspected she was planning to run, and when he saw her car gone, he knew. He'd driven up the mountain, his mind a storm of rage. He saw her car parked and followed her tracks in the snow. He saw them lead to the mine. But the blizzard was a complete whiteout. He got turned around, lost the trail, and nearly froze to death himself. When he finally made it home, he realized the storm had given him the perfect alibi. It had done his work for him. He simply had to let the world believe she was gone forever. He let his son grow up believing his mother had died a tragic death, a victim of nature, all to cover his own monstrous truth. Arlo stared at the pathetic, shrunken man in the chair. The rage he expected to feel was gone, replaced by a vast, empty coldness. There was nothing left to say. He placed the journal back on the table. "That's her story," he said quietly. "Not yours. Not anymore." He turned and walked out of the house, leaving his father alone with the ghosts of his past. He didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a quiet unfolding. Arlo didn't go to the police. There was no physical evidence of a crime, only the words in a journal and the confession of a dying man. Justice, he realized, wasn't about a prison cell. It was about the truth finally seeing the light of day. He quit his job, packed his few belongings, and started driving west, toward the ocean. He now understood that his entire life had been a lie, but the truth, however painful, was liberating. His mother hadn't left him. She had saved him. Her final act wasn't one of disappearance, but one of immense, selfless love. He found a small town on the Oregon coast and rented a room overlooking the sea. For the first time, he felt he could breathe. The heavy, silent grief he had carried for 15 years was replaced by a quiet sense of pride and a deep, aching love for the mother he was only just getting to know. She was a survivor, and in his own way, so was he. He was finally free. Arlo chose to find peace in the truth rather than seeking legal revenge against his frail, elderly father. If you were in his position, would you have made the same choice? Or would you have pursued legal justice, no matter how long it had been? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If stories of long-lost secrets and family mysteries captivate you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss what we uncover next.